Hi, Marcella. You and Chatra, you can turn on your cameras and mics. And Horir, if you'd like to join the discussion, you can also turn on your camera and mic. For those watching the live stream and those who do not want to turn on their cameras and mics, you can post your questions and comments or your ideas in the chat boxes here in the Zoom call, but also online. And I will mark that for Angela to see. So yeah, we'll wait a few more minutes for more people to join, and Angela will introduce herself and start with the ideas at about 5, well, let's say 7 past. And then, yeah, of course, like I said, just it's an interactive session. So Angela and I would like to hear your thoughts and sort of see, what you think. It would be really it would be really nice if everybody shared their connection links in the chat if you want to network with each other. And also tell us where you're from. Like, yeah, Marcella, can you... I'll introduce Marcella first.
Hi.
Yes. Marcella is actually joining Randstad UX as a director for a division on in the Spanish content. So she'll be creating Spanish events like this in the future. Hey, Marcella.
Hi to everyone. Very excited to be here.
So you're over in Spain, right?
Yes. Well, I live in Amsterdam with my Dutch partner. However, my family is in Spain. Actually, I'm from Latin America. I was born in Chile. I have a Chilean mother and a Spanish father. They are currently here in Valencia, so I came to visit them. So it's very summery still here. So yes. However, the Latin chapter, I will be leading it from Amsterdam, are the headquarters.
That's correct.
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, so for the community members, I think most of you know about the awareness initiative that we had, and Helena Nunes organized 3 Portuguese events, and that went really well and was received really well. And so, yeah, Marcella, I think we're going to do some great things together.
Yes, and it's very important actually, because I noticed in the Spanish world, there are not so much material like you find it in English speaking countries. So I think it would be very useful, to transfer some of the knowledge. And sometimes because of language barriers, very good professionals don't have access to it,
Yeah, that's correct. Let me just admit, why can I not? Yeah, so people seem to still be joining. For those in the for those on LinkedIn, please check the chat. You could find the link to join us in the comments. It will be nice to see you here. But if you are on LinkedIn and only watching, you can still engage. Please tell us where you're from. What's the weather like over there? What about this topic interests you? So this conversation is a little bit more deeper. It's more extensive than your average talk. So yeah, we'd really like your thoughts and your ideas, and really share what is the existential experience. And yeah, Angela has created a sort of model, and we'll be discussing that model today. And with that, I think, Angela, we're in a good place for you to introduce yourself and start.
Okay, so my name is Angela Madsen. I am an information architect And what that means is that I architect information for users. I've used that in IA, UX, and content design. So anything where people and information interact, especially on the IT realm, I can kind of get in and push some pixels, basically. And I'm actually going to go straight into the presentation from here. So there we go. So, and what I'm talking about today is basically contextualizing cognitive behavior. It's the first shell, the environment shell in my Who-ness model. So what I use it for, how I use it in my work, it starts with gathering information and goes all the way down to all those use cases that I briefly mentioned that I do, the IA objects, the UX flows and designs, thinking about content design. But even in terms of gathering information from users, I'm thinking about how they're thinking about information to help share that information and get that translated to how it's being used elsewhere. Now, what I've learned through recently is that I'm also doing more than just using it in my work. I found myself turning to it when I'm trying to comprehend and contextualize news from the specifics of articles that I'm reading to even outlets, so that I understand kind of where they're coming from. I've used it to navigate complex relationships, especially in trying to bridge behaviors. It doesn't fix anything. It just helps me figure out where people are coming from. And I've also used it to consider global scale societal issues, culture clashes, and some of our existential threats like climate change. So, and the funny thing is that it all started on another context altogether, finding missing books in a library. So my information architecture practice actually has 2 points of balance. One is the information structure and one is the Who-ness. The Who-ness is what I'm going to be talking about. Just to briefly think about the information structure, they help me understand how the information is or could be organized. So thinking about it in terms of missing books, this is kind of like looking for the book that each object has a stable and defined information structure where it could be located. So it's those Dewey Decimal Systems or the Library of Congress, which is what I was actually working with. And it has the log of use. And so I can trace where it should be, where it maybe has been in the interim, if it's been actually checked out, and where it could be now. So this is stable, documented, very finely structured information. So, and through time, I have grown into breaking the structures up into simple forms, each with its own characteristic of connections and movement, and adding dimensionality to that information to bring it into sync with the complexity of reality. It is complex, but it's ultimately easier to digest of the 2 models. And that I have written up on Medium, and anybody can find it. It's not behind any kind of paywall. So, and then going back to my missing books process, when I confirmed the book wasn't in its regimented place, I had to get creative. I used context and narrative to try to back into how that book might have been misplaced. It was basically the beginnings of thinking through what someone might have been going through to cause that structured information to not work as designed. In other words, it was a very early form of using information structures to balance with and against that model, nascent model of Who-ness. It was an individual focused snapshot of understanding what goes into cognitive behavior. So the form I have now, which this is the encapsulated form, is complex. And today I'm just going to focus on talking about that outermost shell. So, and before I get too much deeper, I do want to be clear. This is not a process or a checklist. It is not simple. So unfortunately, we like simple. The simplicity that I have found in this model is actually a representational gloss over of dimensionality in the information. And the reason I bring this up is that in our culture right now, we have a focus on that speed and efficiency kind of idea. We like models and algorithms that input finite data to bubble it up in as few pathways forward as possible, with singular being the preference. We tend towards simple exposures of information and binary answers of good and bad, right and wrong, done and unsupported. This is implicit in most of the information constructs we've developed, and even in our culture codes. So, and while simple has its use, it's absolutely necessary for information, and it's absolutely necessary for information introductions. It's not necessarily the best thing to be the only way that we deal with information. So the scope of this model can be seen as unrealistically broad if approached with that simple process mentality. It wasn't built for simple. I built it for truthy. I built it to be nimble and agnostic of culture and as variable as our dynamic experiences, perceptions, and decisions can be. We're all different. And yet if we can get to how we're making the decisions, maybe we can understand each other a little more. So what it boils down to is an axiom. So the axiom that I come back to time and time again is that we cannot assume the nuances of one are the reflection of everyone, or that the mean of everyone is the only available truth for one. And I'll be bringing this up a few times during this presentation. Ultimately, my model is about people and what goes into how we make decisions. It doesn't classify the decisions themselves as an output invested with good or bad. It doesn't even classify how a person is getting to their decisions as good or bad. It's about how we approach information, how we see it, and how we decide from it. So information is not constrained by scope. Information is in everything. Our consciousness is ultimately predicated on information and the sense that we're using it. And the information in our consciousness is processed mostly by what is in our environment, through our senses, our sight, our smell, sound, taste, and touch. If we compartmentalize our actions and behavior away from environment too deeply, they stop making sense. So the scope of this model is ultimately anything in context where an individual human is making decisions. So super broad, hard to really digest. But that said, my primary use is to understand how information is moving through information technology with a user in mind. So internal or external? Did somebody say something?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing with you.
No, I want people to speak up. If I'm not making off of a pause, please stop me.
No, I mean, I think between you and I, we've already spoken a bit. I think, I agree with what you're saying. It's also like a reflection, I think, like I said, I'm very excited for this session because you're touching on topics that I personally find very interesting, and you also resonate with the same ideas that I have. So yeah, you'll just hear a lot of yeses from me. Everybody else, you're welcome to also join the conversation. So if you have anything to share at any stage, you can just shoot your questions at Angela.
Yeah. And I can see the chat number pop up, so I am trying to pay a little bit of attention to that. So in case people can't interject, if you get on that chat, I should see it within 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, you can also raise your hand and just post the message in the chat. So that's possible. And on LinkedIn, you can just post your message and I'll add it here as well. Yeah, so sorry for the interruption, Angela.
No worries. It helps everybody understand that it's actually okay to interrupt me. No worries.
Yeah. Awesome.
Very cool. So going back to the slide, my primary use is to understand how information is moving through information technology with a user in mind. I think I already said that actually. So, and when I'm thinking through information, I'm thinking through it from internal to external, from touching the nuts and bolts of how we're getting information into and coded in our programming and our digital lives, from and then ingesting the outputs. So while I try to keep all these people in mind, from the people touching the nuts and bolts to the outputs, those different cognitive patterns, different use cases, different viewpoints, I try to stay as respectful to them as possible within the budget allowed. The only way that I do constrain what I'm thinking about is that I am focused on the individual and not how we treat each other and form group dynamics. That is actually a really, really gnarly problem set. And even with that caveat, other people are still part of the context in which we all make decisions. Others are part of our environment. So what goes into our individual cogitations replicate, and fractal patterns are created through our ever larger groups. To kind of think about it this way. If one individual decides to do a novel thing and it's kind of seen as a glitch, if 100 pick it up, it can be seen as an edge case. If 1 million pick it up, then that becomes something of a force. It becomes a significant social pattern. So individuals, as they share information and constructs, can actually inform society. And then society. Oh, were you agreeing again?
Also, you know, I especially agree because of, you know, what motivated me to build design in focus, and this part of the specifically with the networks and the communities, because yeah, if you connect people with the same interest, perhaps we can do more, you know, get somewhere after all of the layoffs. And
we start forming echo chambers and understanding that we're not the only ones thinking through these things. We're not the only ones seeing these things. And that in and of itself can become a pattern. And we can choose, whoops, sorry. we can choose whether or not to act on that. But even the fact that the patterns are forming is a pattern in and of itself.
Yeah. I'm just going to turn on the light, but really cool point.
So individuals inform society. And society as a whole, comprised of individuals and dynamic inclusion of cultures, shapes guidelines and standards of behavior. So think about it in terms of this. If 5 million people pick up a new pattern, it can actually become this pressure point for the yet non-conforming to follow that new pattern. If we think about the spread of the internet as something, as an example, and my guess is that everybody who is on this call and everybody who is watching from a distance is actually makes their living in some significant way because of the internet. This did not happen 40 years ago. This is an emergent pattern within our society that has individual ramifications. So we aggregate as society, and society helps to herd individuals into enough of a semblance of commonality to muddle along. And in a truly healthy society, it's not looking for a single replicable form. We're not looking for George 1, George 2, George 3, George 4, George 5, and so on. We're looking for diversity, healthy ecologies, whether or not it's biodiversity on the planet or the diversity of the human species, we need diversity in order to survive long term. So that sense of constrained back and forth breaks when we think about environments. We change our individual behavior based on our context. So this concept can get really complex if we talk about moving between two cultural groups, but it is also as simple as the weather. We change, we wear more than a swimming suit if it's below freezing outside, and we tend to remove layers as it gets warmer. So we are, in essence, adapting to our environment. It's one of those things that's made our species so successful on this planet. So as we adapt to the environment outside of our core comfort, we can actually also live outside of where we have 100% survivability 100% of the time. You know, we were talking about how we had our first frost last night. We can continue to survive in these below zero temperatures because we've learned to create houses and tools and warmer clothes. And this adaptation is implicit in most of our definitions. Okay. I'm sorry, I think that was Italian and I don't understand Italian. I don't understand anything but English. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think it was just background noise from Nashmi joining.
It was a background.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So even though, and then as the same thing that happens with individuals and societies and accumulated decisions affecting society and informing individuals and shaping standards, those society implications can actually aggregate to impact the environment, and it becomes this whole big cycle. And then beyond the stew of environment in which we live and breathe is another whole set of inescapable movements. So we live on a rotating planet that orbits a sun, which spins in a galaxy, that rotates in a universe that might be part of many. It might be part of a multiverse. And I don't think anybody questions this for a second, but this planet itself, this thing that we compartmentalize ourselves from cognizantly on a day-to-day basis, it's a subset of massive layers. And I'm seeing that there's some things in the chat. I'm going to see if I can see what.
Oh, no worries.
No, we're fine. Okay, cool beans.
Yeah.
Thank you. So nothing stays the same. We know that the weather will change in an hour, but it's more than that. We don't live in a pinpoint of location, nor a pinpoint in time. Even if we experientially, as a person, if you're like me and are glued to your desk day in and day out, year after year, the universe is taking us on a ride. So to try to believe that we can pin anything down and make it work the same way ad infinitum is irreconcilable with reality. Stability is a notion of short-sightedness. And this is the true context in which we live. And this idea of implicit instability informs my model without being explicit. It was the triangulated information that helped confirm that checklists would make the model fail through time. So my individual cognitive model is actually 4 major nested nodes. The first one is what I'm talking about today, environment, this context in which we live. And then I also have reaction and response and mind. So all of these things help to inform how we're making decisions, where we're getting from A to B, all of these things. And it doesn't provide checklists, but qualities to check in on. And the reason that I mentioned the 3 that I'm not focusing on today is because these borders that I use are only for my own mental chunking. So within the environment, I have two axes. They're both spectrum nodes of possibility. So a spectrum node, I'm actually taking a category and trying to find the furthest extremes that I can find. And even if I only know 2 or 3 things within those extremes now, the implication is that it could be infinite. So whatever we know for the extremes, it could be infinite. Those extremes could actually go out further. And I'm trying to remember that there is more to the world than I currently understand.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is the surviving to thriving. So we live to survive, and we hope to someday thrive. So to survive means we're continuing as a living being. It's expected that survival isn't easy. We experience pain, we experience hunger, emotional upset, and if we're surviving, we carry on. So and at the far extreme, we want to experience the more pleasant feelings. We want to feel energy coursing through our bodies, and to have survival kind of be a foregone conclusion. So we want to feel like our minds are pinging along in mastery of our preferred states. We want to thrive. So if surviving focuses on kind of our physical selves and as fundamental as a heartbeat, and we think about thriving, carrying life all the way through to zestful experience, that's kind of a mental state. And between the two are all the spectrum of possibility. So, and then whether it's physical or mental, we can thread along in a baseline state, or we can be high functioning. There are so many ways to kind of wrap our heads around the spectrum node that moves from baseline to high functioning. At kind of one of the more simpler ways to understand it, think about it as the difference between barely getting enough food to sustain life and getting that perfect nutrition in the time needed for it to be optimally available, tailored to a particular body and what they're doing. So that those precision medicine sports enthusiasts who know exactly what they need to eat an hour before they work out, or 3 hours before, whatever. So if we think about what's on these spectrum nodes, it can actually be kind of overwhelming. So what I've done is actually create an example. But before I get into the example, does anybody have any questions about this so far?
No questions.
Okay. So if we think about a fairly common workday, so and with this, I'm thinking about the things that we hear as we go to the office, as we talk to people on Slack. So if most of us hope that we love our work. So let's pretend our person has found something that they really love to do. We'll also give our imaginary individual another boon. They found a business in which to contribute that they truly and deeply believe in the overall effort. But they didn't understand before they started that they would be micromanaged. And as they have lived in this company, they've also figured out that the culture tends towards a strict hierarchy. So do your job, do it as expected, stay in your lane. And we're trying to consider the broader spectrum of inputs. So let's include the allergies that they are constantly watching for. And diets are something that most of us have tried at some point to lose weight. That precision medicine that I mentioned in the last slide, it could even be something as long-term and future forward as kind of a heart-healthy diet. And the commute time during their interview was a fraction of what it is during rush hour. So I guess this person really is on site in the office, not working from home. I didn't even realize that. And then there's a round of layoffs, and their tennis elbow that hasn't affected them since college suddenly reappears. And today, just to put a cherry on top of it all, they forgot their lunch on the counter. So I think that we've actually been making decisions based on the idea of surviving through thriving for a long time. So let me show you what I mean by this. So if we move over to the left, what seems to be purely survival, these are the things that someone might have to do literally to keep their body going, avoid their allergies, short-term thinking like making sure that they have enough money for food and shelter. And some of it might be long-term, like a heart-healthy diet. And we'll shift over to the right, what seems to be nice to haves. It doesn't particularly affect your ability to stay alive, but it does make life juicy. A day without lunch is not going to kill you, nor is a job that you dislike in a company with misaligned values, but it will help you feel like your life is meaningful. From the outside looking in, these would all be qualities that are fairly universal. Someone not surviving when they have enough to eat or thriving when they love their work would probably be questioned. But there are some things that don't really feel meaningful in a survive to thrive spectrum. So these are things that we've historically just kind of been expected to deal with, like a long commute or being micromanaged. So if we start thinking about it in terms of baseline and high functioning, the bits and pieces come into play. So some things keep a person closer to baseline state, like setting off your allergies or forgetting it at lunch. And some things seem to keep a person high functioning, like loving your work. But even the things that seemed kind of throwaway and noise in a purely will this help me survive or thrive mindset settle into an answer. No matter who you are, 3 hours of commuting every day is eventually going to ding your energy. And did you notice where I put the micromanagement and strict hierarchy? They're up in the high functioning. This is because, like in the last slide, we're looking at it from the outside looking in. So if someone wants to get exactly what they want out of an employee, micromanagement and hierarchy makes it much more likely that they will. So from the outside looking in, this person reads as high functioning. So, but part of what I am trying to do with my model is to think about things from the inside, because this is ultimately what the whole model is trying to remember us for us to do, from the instigating points, which is what the environment is, through the decision-making process down to behavior. So let's pretend we took the time to ask questions and really listen. Their allergies are so under control that it's like a new lease on life. Their available energy is skyrocketing. But the constant pain from their tennis elbow is distracting and eating up some of that new energy, which annoys them, which is why they're talking about it so much. And they are incredibly frustrated with the 15 hours they spend commuting every week. So working collaboratively and cross-functionally in a strictly hierarchical job is breaking all kinds of culture codes, but they also used to it. So it's going to land somewhere in the low middle. And this person doesn't feel like they have agency when they're micromanaged. So that moves down. It puts them closer to their baseline instead of high functioning. And oddly enough, the recent layoffs are freeing them a bit. They don't feel horrible about it, and it's putting them in a higher function, but not for the reasons assumed from the outside. And it's not actually changing their work quality. The reason why is complicated, and we'll get to that in a few slides. So when we start thinking about both axes together, something almost magical happens. What's both survival and baseline start looking a lot like health. And what's both baseline and thriving start looking like expression. What's both high functioning and thriving looks like a flow state. And what's both surviving and high functioning start having qualities of safety. And here, what I've put in safety is also a mirror node. Recent layoffs can both make a person feel unsafe and have a chilling effect to their open expression. But this isn't where my thinking ends. In my mind, I'm adding degrees. So I hone the shape away from the free space that I've been using so far. I start with the low degree. It's not aiming anywhere towards the label, so I want it far away from those labels of safety, flow state, expression, and health. I tend to call these arise states because at their extreme, they will pull down the hopeful state of the label. So health becomes disease, expression is held tight, safety becomes danger, and flow state is a rote function. at a high degree means that it's more in line with my chosen labels. So I'll make that the outer bounds and then pull in the axis labels. And then I'll place the arise states, which are high stress. And I'll place the qualities that tend to be more fungible. So they move with the arise states and the ones that aren't, that are towards the hopeful labels. And finally, the ones that are nearing or in line with the environmental quadrant labels, which turn out often to be mitigating stress, which is why I call it mitigating stress. These things tend to work so well for a person that they can often calm the other stresses. So if we take a step back so we can see it from a higher level again, we have the 4 quadrants with the labels that make sense from the 2 axes, and then the 2 axes surviving to thriving and baseline to high functioning. But how do those degrees actually function? It's a diagrammatic mental shortcut. So we'll overlay the degrees and remove the labels. So I consider each quadrant as moving along each spectrum node. In other words, baseline is still the inside edge of safety and flow state, and high functioning is still the outside edge of health and expression. Surviving and thriving do something similar. So surviving becomes the inside of flow state and expression, thriving the outside of safety and health. This frees up each quadrant to work independently. So in other words, health can be in baseline, but a flow state can be high functioning. Each person basically gives weight to each quadrant according to their current mind. So even if their health is not good, they can still be an ultimately fulfilled person. So if Stephen Hawking was an exceptional prime example of this. So if you think about that axiom that I mentioned early on, we cannot assume the nuances of one are the reflection of everyone. If you think about it in terms of Stephen Hawking, just because Stephen Hawking understands the mechanics of the universe doesn't mean that everybody has that level of nuance and understanding, or that the mean of everyone is the only available truth for one. Just because the average person could walk doesn't mean that Stephen Hawking could. So do we have any questions at this level?
I don't see any questions anywhere. If you guys have any questions, you can post it in the chat. I hope nothing is frozen. That sometimes happens. I did, I have, like I said, I align with you so much. And this is basically, if you look at one of the, so I have a symbol for design in focus, the symbolic logo. And it pretty much has a target in there, and the 4 pillars that I founded for design in focus is in this. So industry talks is the professional, so that's like, say, flow state, and then health, because you're talking about it pretty much has a target in there, and the 4 pillars that I founded for design in focus is in this. Industry talks is the professional, so that's like, say, flow state, and then it's Marcella.
Yeah, it's coming through Marcella.
Yeah. So Marcella, I was hearing myself through your speaker. Anyway, yeah, so the 4 pillars, one is the human experience is expression, the dark side of the force is safety, the dream team is flow state, and I say industry talks is health, because that's how our industry is doing. So from a professional capacity, I just love your model. Everything resonates with how I perceive it as well. So I think it's very well put together. Marcella, you're also into behavioral science. What do you think of this model so far?
Well, might be very useful. However, like you said, you need to always consider, because I come from a therapy setting. So in therapy, we try very much to individualize or to see the person. So there are times, like you said, because you give an example, but might change according to the person, and also from a cultural point of view. For example,
Absolutely.
from my country, let's say in Chile, I used to travel 1.5 hours because it's a very big city, Santiago. People travel, but they don't get stressed as you might in other countries, you know? Because we socialize, we talk in the bus, you know, it's a different way expressing that. So this model might be very useful, but maybe also to consider the cultural aspect or the individual aspect. Like you say, Stephen Hawking, for example, may have a different perception. It's about the perception of the stimulus, you know? So that would be my comment, but seems that you did a great job trying to put together all this.
Yeah, and just a very quick reminder, this is only talking about environment. So those perceptions and how people are ingesting the information, those are in the interior layers of the model that I would love to be able to encapsulate it all in half an hour, but I have not been able to figure it out yet. So
yes, a lot of job, a lot of work.
It's a complex model. So yeah.
But congratulations on trying and doing it.
We have to try. If we don't try, we will never succeed.
Yes, of course, yes.
I think with machine learning, it would be much easier to visualize this. Can you just not do that for now? Just stop it for like a second, sorry. So where was I? Yeah, with machine learning, it will be easier to visualize on the spectrum, you know, these sort of pinpoints, because I think on pen and paper it's really difficult, or in a 2D scope, because the spectrum is, you know, multidimensional. So I think this is just the start of making AI intelligent, is having these sort of variables and seeing how they fluctuate to create these strings vibrating through the different dimensions, so to speak. But that's the vision that I have.
Very cool. Yeah, and I have not thought about AI in terms of this specific model. So I know that it is implied. I know that I have thought about it in terms of the arise state and all the implications of having kind of that automation bias baked in where people aren't watching it anymore. But in terms of how this model could affect AI itself, that actually would be hugely complex. And I think it would be more along the lines of those interactive groups that I specifically I basically put a line in and said, I can't think about that yet. and it's that group formation and fractal patterns that happen as we interact as people. I think that's where AI is really going to make the biggest impact.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think the potential is there, but humanity is a little bit more complex, because AI relies on a logic that is created by us. It's not a natural logic. It's not, we are natural logic, we're biologic. And logic misses three things, and let's say those three things are creativity, innovation, and design. No, that's just a little joke. But anyway, I think, you know, we'll always respond to logic when we meet those patterns. That's also why companies spend so much money on innovation and creativity, because things don't stay the same. There's no, like you said, there's no single point that remains the same. We change throughout the
Everything
experience.
will eventually change somewhere, somehow.
Yeah,
Be
cool.
perceived differently, something.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a question, Nashmi?
Thank you, Madsen. I was about to ask, so thank you for this lovely presentation. And I was wondering, like, from, let's say, Gen Z perspective, because I'm 22, I'm 22 years old, so, and I work as a UX researcher. And once I noticed your model is just like surprisingly accurate, and this is, I thought like, this is what it's missing, like around the environment or everything, like from academic perspective, because I still study and work as part-time. But once you said like diet or also commute, it's on the health aspect, and I just figured out, like, mentally, once you ensure that this perspective are accurate, you are high functioning. And this is accurate because we still like missing everyone put your a lot of job on you, and you're still working, and you kind of miss like caring for your health or mental health also. You maybe not like sick or something, but mentally you are like just exhausted. So thank you for this. Yeah, this is my addition.
Okay, very cool. I'm glad it helped you
The guy in the corner. Look at the
Actually,
guy.
I'm amazed that I helped somebody make sense of something that quickly. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue on. So back to our story. There was a reason I stopped there. And a quick size change so we can, and some transparency so we can play. So now I'm getting into the more complex stuff. So first, re-acknowledging that we have a mirror node. So recent layoffs are both in safety and expression. So for the sake of orientation, I'm actually going to start at the node at the far lower right. So that's strictly hierarchical. With some conversations, we can figure out that the strict hierarchy is directly attached to living with bad ergonomics and sparking that tennis elbow again, the long commute every day, and micromanagement. So, and see the micromanagement that we just pointed to? So there we go. Let's connect that out the same way. It's affecting how this person thinks about their work. It's affecting how this person considers the business that they're working with, and even adding enough stress that their allergies are spiking more, amongst some other things. It just continues reverberating through the whole system. And then the connections, so they form out from there, and we'll focus on that hopefully rare occurrence, forgetting their lunch on the counter, and see how that is affected or affects them. So they couldn't turn back to grab it because of that 1.5 hour commute. They're worried about how this will affect their diet, and they had to put their allergy meds next to it to remember to take later. So their allergies are actually going to be affected by this today. None of this we'd know without talking to them. So, and what this shows is a network structure. So those connections to other information isn't capped. If another conversation, it becomes clear that their commute compounded with ergonomics to tweak their tennis elbow, then that connection is formed. Same thing, that if they figure out that their diet was actually helping them maintain their allergies, that connection can be formed. Those connections get added according to the individual. Their perception is not questioned, not at this level. And if we're looking for emergent properties and context through groups of people, we do start adding critical thinking and a few other qualities to help us include well understood patterns that might not be leveraged here. And so we can go out and ask specific questions for those, or consider emergent properties. But there's no cap to the potential number of connections. Do we have people asking questions in the chat?
No, none whatsoever.
I'm seeing the number go up.
My cat is acting up today. I'm really sorry for the interruption. Yeah.
I'm just impressed mine hasn't decided to just sit on the desk behind my computer and watch me talk, because she's been doing that a lot lately. So They're their own beings. They do what they want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they do notice what we do. And when there's other people calling attention, then it's like, well, I think I shall come for my attention right now because, you're busy. And then when you have time and you're like, hello, kitty, go away. Cats. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, going back to the presentation. So the thing about a network structure is that it is stable. It doesn't move or shift. So when we talk to this person, it's clear that on a different day, a different level of existing energy, leaving their lunch at their table on the counter at home is actually far closer to a stress state. All the connections would shift with the whole, with it, and potentially even act through the whole thing. So that static sense making of structure doesn't work. It's more than a network. It's a system. These environments aren't set in stone for how they affect someone, but shift and move with the addition and subtraction of information. So I'm going to do another switch. So first I'll remove some noise so you can see more easily what's going on. And then we're switching what's the outer and inner meaning of those circles. So the inner meaning becomes the green hope state, and the outer circle becomes that red arise state. And then I'm going to move the nodes to reflect that change and change the color so we remember that they've been switched. And then I'm reapplying the labels and reinstating the connections. Now I've ghosted the yellow points the way that it normally is in the model so that you can see kind of where things are matched. So the reason I do this is because the connections are elastic and people can kind of get more easily that when you stretch a rubber band and it's stretching with more stress, things have a tendency to move with it. So if you loosen it and it goes slack, things have a tendency to mostly stay in the same place. And I want to engage that understanding of force factor in people's minds.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting, sorry.
No worries.
I did a similar thing, which I showed you. But then I also showed like just a spectrum to show that it moves. So with these dots, I think, if you were to connect where they originally were to where they moved from, then that's the first sort of like shift where you see the real time fluctuations of reality. Yeah. And that is where I think that machine learning can assist us and in showcasing that, because for example now you thought it out properly, it's well presented, but seeing, because they were all yellow, so I don't know which yellow dot went somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that some went all the way from the top to the bottom.
Absolutely.
And yeah, demonstrating that very mechanic, I think. Yeah, exactly.
So, and remember, this is just the transposition of what's inside and what's outside.
Exactly.
And it's just to help people see how that elastic nature of the connections can kind of function. So I've been doing this long enough that I actually think about it in terms of 4-dimensional information. So I'm getting away from the idea that we're just living in a 3-dimensional world and there's 4, 5, 6, 8 dimensions within information very easily, but it's hard to represent on a 2-dimensional, especially PowerPoint is not the most wonderful animation software out there.
Yeah, not exactly. I think it is so complex, and it is, it's mind-blowing when you get into the actual meaning of it. And here's just two images, to showcase that. It's like, I think it's phenomenal. It's just if you have to like really consider the full scope, it can get nuanced and complex because each one of us are experiencing reality in a completely different way than the rest. And the variables of what happens in a day also changes, like leaving your lunch, you know, so it's really massive.
Yeah, and this model doesn't even really environment, I don't have any of the perception in it. When I get to the point of when I'm talking about perception, I'm actually using this model as part of the perception model. Does that make sense? So this model becomes just a node, even though it's this complex, even though it's encapsulated into a little nugget of information that's included in the perception model.
Yeah.
I'm in some ways not very nice to people because I don't keep it simple. I'm so focused on trying to make sure that I'm understanding the whole that put simplicity kind of to the side.
Yeah, I think as designers, we're often told to make things really simple. But I think complexity is nature, and whenever we create these synthetic environments where where there isn't where things are rigid, then we fail and we wonder, why did that fail? You know. Yeah, but very interesting.
So I'm going to move things around into a higher stress state. So if we move that micromanaged up, what happens is it affects the connections. So I did get a little bit to what you were talking about, Candace, which in turn pulls the other nodes that it's connected to out, depending on where they're going in terms of stress. Now, this has a cascading effect through the entire system. It doesn't stop just with this first layer of connection. It continues on until the whole system is pulled out of stress. Honestly, I didn't do it because it gets so complicated in PowerPoint that I was losing track of my objects. So when I mentioned those recent layoffs and how they were affecting how a person is in baseline or functioning. So think about that story again and think about how it deviates from the system. So the implication of the holistic person has been teased throughout this presentation, but this aspect of the story really brings it home. In our imaginary person, the stress change doesn't start with the layoffs. It starts with their belief in this effort. It's taken a nosedive. So by talking to this person, their biggest worry, the thing that's on their mind the most, is the fact that the corporation and their messaging isn't reconciling well with their actions. So it's messing around with their values and the meaningfulness they attribute to their jobs. So it in turn makes the implicit danger of their job less significant. So where the assumption from the outside is that they're stressing out because of the recent layoffs, they're actually less stressed about the recent layoffs and more stressed about the cognitive dissonance between the company messaging and actions. So it shows us that even though the environment is compartmentalized from the others in my model, it's not standalone. They really are nested nodes, reaction, response, and mind. It's one part of the whole. The boundaries are ghosts. They're just there for mental chunking. And the truth is, we've honed in pretty tight on narratives of work. We expanded it a bit with the addition of allergies and tennis elbow, the commute, and missing lunch. But the environment does not have lines of demarcation that say you can include this, but you must exclude that. So when those quadrants hit a high level, they are going to hit their high level. If they're worried about something going on in their personal lives that have nothing to do with work, they're still going to have that stress with them. That environment is still going to come with them. So moving back to the standard way with the awry on the inside and that hopeful state on the outside, the flow, expression, safety, and health. focused on the outside of the circle. I have to admit that I set up this particular environment reading for failure. It wasn't broad enough. We focused on qualities and characteristics we've all heard people talk about during our workday. So partly it was so that to not shift people too far in their thinking too fast. And it was while showing people how to expand their assumed data set. We only expanded it by what these people were talking about already, that were so much on their mind that they were expressing it. But as we talk to people more specifically, we can actually expand the environment even further. So this is a system, and part of working with a system is to understand that data breathes. It expands and contracts and expands again ad infinitum. So the reality is that if this person were actually super worried about whether they'd be able to pay their mortgage in a few days, that stress would still impact their system, even though it has nothing to do with specifically the work environment. Whatever is on their mind is part of who they are. So that means that a checklist or taxonomy, while that can be a time and effort saver for a while, it needs to be revisited periodically to check for expansion and contraction. The people who have the best insight into understanding their environment is the people living in it. In other words, the data needs to be built from the bottom up. It has to allow for emergence. An environment doesn't have lines of demarcation for what can and can't be included. So the only way to know what will be included is by talking to the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what that means is that my axiom has to be held tight. We cannot assume the nuances of one are the reflection of everyone, or that the mean of everyone is the only available truth for one. So we do this over and over and over again. We assume that the best practice is the only correct practice. And we think about, we've dreamt up the perfect model of women's health back in the 1950s. She was called Nora. And no, they actually tried to find a living example of her and couldn't. So, and when it comes to designing cockpits, they took an average across a broad male spectrum of physical attributes, and it actually fit no one. No one was comfortable in those cockpits because they were designed for somebody who never actually existed. And because they did not mold and flex with people, the people who needed to go in them were just incredibly uncomfortable and so focused on their discomfort that their environment was impacted. So we also forget this axiom in our media representation, in what we're looking for in good employees, how we unpack communication shortcuts and meaning as we move from culture to culture. In our simplification, we forget that the simplicity is only an entry point. It's not meant to be the sum total. It's a place to decide to dig deeper and develop more context in your own time and per your interest and need. If we do not allow for the expansion of simplicity, so, and this, Candace, is getting a little bit to what you were just mentioning. If we don't allow for that expansion of simplicity, we're basically telling people that this is all they can be, all they could be, all they should be, and all they're allowed to be. Mm-hmm. So I think this actually might even inform the tribal communities that are forming in between our nations and even in our nations. People are aggregating to those accepted qualities that feel less cumbersome and accept the whole in order so they can be accepted.
I think this is, so something that popped up for me was I completely lost my train of thought because I read something here and it threw me off. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll speak again when it comes back to me.
Okay. So, and I've been thinking about these quadrants for a long time, and I do have aspects that I check in with, but at the same time, I try to keep them fairly broad and simple. So when it comes to health, I'm thinking about a functional body with some creature comforts and living in a non-toxic environment. So we want the health to not be impacted by the environment at all, except as a positive thing. When it comes to safety, it's the clear reality that you will not be subject to trauma as long as you do not instigate aggression. So if you want to be a bully and kind of be really aggressive, you can assume some backlash from that. But if you're truly in a safe environment and you're just going along your workday, you don't expect to have any kind of trauma or aggression aimed at you.
Mhm.
For expression, sorry, what?
I think when we talk about aggression, there are very different ways of expressing aggression. And something that I see quite frequently is agitation and sort of, harassment, which, leads to other forms of safety that's not necessarily linked to aggression, the standard aggression, because usually, things will be done very carelessly, and then somebody responds with aggression where, and I'm talking about extreme cases, human objectification, blah, blah, blah. But I remembered what I was saying before, but I'm going to keep that for later because that relates to actually corporate identity more than UX design. So let's, I don't want to interrupt this too much.
Okay, I will try to get through the next couple slides really quickly. So expression, the personal will to experience, learn, and form novel outputs. And flow state is that agency to make novel decisions and feeling secure that when mistakes are made, because we're all human, we all make mistakes, they can be fixed, they can be acknowledged, and people can move on. So, and the arise states, so I talked to Candace about this a couple days ago. I actually get depressed every time I walk through the arise state slide as it originally existed. So I decided to gloss over it a little bit. My original version is still at the very, very end beyond my thank you slide. So if we want to talk about it, it is still available to talk about it. So, and the reason that I get depressed is telling, though. When I start thinking about all the ways that the arise states bubble up before we ever hit collapse, and we tend to have this idea that you have to hit collapse before it's really not right. So when you think about how we're edging towards collapse and how those states present themselves, it's kind of clear that the greatest portion of us live in stress. And it's not only that a few of us, and it's only that a few of us have attained some form of the labeled states. And it's a little heart-wrenching. It's a lot heart-wrenching. So it's there, we can talk about it. Just want to get through the last few slides before we get really deeply into it. So it's all a system. These environments aren't set in stone for how they affect someone. A different day, different level of energy, compounded effect of positive or negative movements over time, a novel happening. They all work together to shift the individual system. So all the connections will shift with it and potentially even act as a vector force on the system, cascading its effect throughout. They're all working on each other constantly over time. Our entire environment is deeply intertwined. Each of these quadrants are affected by countless systems. And I don't think, and these systems are connected with a level of interdependence that I don't think we've really begun to understand. If we did, there wouldn't be any fight left in the global warming is a hoax camp. So when you look at the circumnavigating band, consider it a flattened cross-sectional micro-thin layer representing the pixelated connections that support a single human life. So dense, it looks like a solid field. It still might be an oversimplification. It might even be an egregious oversimplification. The goal here to remember is that each of us lives in the environment. We're never separated from it. Every time we oversimplify a construct, whether it's a user flow, an automated mortgage application review, too tightly constraining the data options available to fill out a form, we are potentially setting someone up for failure. Every time we create forms and processes that are too complex for their use case, wasting precious time, effort, cognitive load for something that could be simpler, we're skewing a person's environmental system. It's all a balance. It's all a bet. Not striving for balance affects too many people to not try to get it right, and yet it is bound for change. So my personal preference is to build dynamic forward to offset the change management of the whole. It's ultimately why I built the model like I did. It means that I have a personal preference for operations side of IT development rather than the public facing. It's more intense in the setup, more prone to failure if it's not doesn't have good enough documentation and shared understanding, but it is the smart move if the system is intended to it exists long term. So again, stability is a notion of short-sightedness. So if you bake that into the system, this ability to move and shift as reality shifts, it's going to survive longer. And checking in with our assumptions of the context helps to poke holes in our constructs. The system is in constant flow, sharing everything, including health and disease, joy and anger, expression and repression. There is no us and them, not at the end of the day. There's only us. What we allow to be done to one for arbitrary characteristics, we can assume will eventually be done to me and mine. What poisons we allow to continue in our environment that affects someone will eventually affect us. So I've been working on this model for about 30 years now, and I haven't always known that this was where it was leading. I don't have a clear construct of where I pulled in all of my information, or even notes on where, why, and what led me to shifting certain gears. So the model needs to be used with a fully engaged brain because of it. So, and this is because, I am human too. I am implicit in my own model. We don't always know all the things we are shortcutting to get to our understanding. And I could have missed something that makes it work for me, but taken too closely point by point could make it not work for others. So my request for anyone thinking to leverage my model is to remain true to a certain core precepts, not attributing good bad within the model, striving for holistic balance, and remembering that we cannot assume the nuances of one are the reflections of everyone, or that the mean of everyone is the only available truth for one. It's all of that.
Yeah. So, a couple of things came by, and I thought, well, it might deviate from the focus a bit too much, so I left it for later. But first off, talking about your model, if people want to use this model, are you sharing it anywhere? Is there somewhere where they can download a template? Are you offering courses, training? Yeah.
This is the first time, I mean, I've shared it with probably a couple dozen people at this point, but this is the first time that I've ever publicly shared it. So thank you, Candace, for pushing me to do this.
Well, I think it's a great, I mean, I'm just going to be a parrot if I say it, but yeah. And then I think another important topic is that we often take knowledge for granted.
We do.
When I was a kid, people used to say, and this is a particular saying in the language that I used to speak. What I have forgotten, you must still learn. And that's a way of telling younger people that they're inexperienced. But it sounds cooler because it's an actual saying. But we do take our knowledge for granted. You assume that everybody knows what you know. Yeah. So
the breadth of reality and information is so broad that it can't be encapsulated in one human mind anymore.
No. And I've always said, like people always talk about Einstein and he's the greatest mind that ever lived. But I mean, I don't know all of Einstein. I know a few concepts and some concepts have been disproven. So, I don't know. I view people as variables of different things. It's he might have some great theories, but I wouldn't put my money on him being right about everything.
No one can be right about everything.
No.
We hope that we're right about a few things and can make those few things really great.
And also the right, so it's only right for us because of our context and our environment. So it can be right for me and right for you, but it's two different things and we need one thing. So yeah, the complexity is
and through time things shift as well. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to continue what Gandhi says. Like I said, I'm a practicing psychotherapy, and we look always in people to, make aware their authenticity. So that is the key, because the truth for everyone is completely, is individual. It's
right.
Completely personal. The truth of some people are different from the one from others. So that is very important when we practice psychotherapy. And some more comments about your model, because we use the thing when you say, for example, not attributing good bad within the model. We use it a lot, but we notice that people that have more mental illness are the people that use evaluations in a stream. So too much judging, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. That creates a disbalance in the person when it's too much. You use it for certain things, aspect of reality, but we notice that the internal mind should not be used so much if you want to be healthier.
Right. So
and also
it's so contextual. Yeah. So
exactly.
Sorry.
And it's very important for us, the concept of self-regulation. That means your individual system regulates all the time with the environment. So this is the trendy concept now, self-regulation in psychology. So it's pretty much what you're describing, that you need to be in balance, and it's a dynamic force because it's all the time changing. So you need to regulate yourself within the ambience, environment.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Just some comments on that.
During my design studies, the number one lesson that we got so one of the modules, the professional studies modules, the key takeaway that we learned above everything else in your professional landscape is to remain dynamic, to respond to things. And it's very, it's very integral to design, this dynamic and response. But one of the challenges is that we go through this education system for 12 years, typically. I did mine in less, but typically we have 12 years of yes, no, right, correct, wrong, good, bad, and that shapes our logic. Mm-hmm. So now this logic is shaped for us because we're trained in it. Now, if we go and call that, okay, so that's the first obstacle. The second obstacle is referring to that as mental illness. I don't believe in mental illness. I think...
But the society conceptualize as mental illness. Also, is a discussion on that. But yes,
but that's
it's a relative concept. It's what this society call
Yeah. So, psychologists use so my link to you and you both is the behavioral science, which is the foundation of UX. And I find that a lot of people think that because they've been trained with a set of data, that is they just naturally assume it. And they also we all validate ourselves. And so, one of the challenges that I've faced in my life was sort of reaching a professional and communicating something when they're set in their perception of what their analysis is versus what my motivations or thoughts or analysis are. So that makes things very complicated. That's why, I think, maybe machine learning will help us visualize some of this complexity, but it is, infinitely complex.
So, and actually, I actually really love that you keep hitting on machine learning and this idea that you do keep coming back to our interactions. And I tend to call it butt heads because that's when I'm paying the most attention to it. I know that there are totally nice interactions that aren't butting heads, but when we butt heads, we tend to get very stuck in our ideas because we get this idea that we have to be right, because we have had this indoctrination from kindergarten on that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. But one of the information formulations that really rocked my world was weapons of math destruction, and how she shows from a mathematical level how these automations in our machine learning is actually supporting and aggravating our biases that bubble up into social constructs. So this is really important to get right, because we are getting to the point where we're giving it an automation bias. We're saying, okay, it's figured out, somebody smarter than me has done it, we'll just do what it says. And we can't necessarily do that.
No, no, definitely. I think that's, well, for me, so when we're talking about AI integration, that's a different topic as well. So for me, machine learning, and it's more like data visualization. So we're talking about minimum 4D, and this 4D is, say, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. It creates that big strip that you presented. But that's also variable because, a lot of reality is perception. And, how you feel or what you believe about reality as well influences that analysis. So with machine learning, what I think can aid us there is showing the multiplistic value of this discussion, because currently we have several images, but animating that multiplistic complexity, I think, is what I'm trying to say about. So if you look at charts, we used to have like line charts, but now people are starting to map really like 3D charts, because things fluctuate in certain areas, and still, even though they're in the same pillar, so I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, yeah, and I think so one of my misconceptions about AI and machine learning was, I was like, okay, the first thing they're going to do is reference the world. Everybody's going to be, we're going to know in 5 seconds now what that Elie Wiesel quote that is banging on my head that I need to get today. I'm going to be able to find that in 5 seconds now. And it's not happening. So instead, they went straight to the we had these mythologies that we would be better than AI because we are these creative generative forces. So they skipped the reference part and went straight to the generation. I think your ideas that they can help keep us away from our biases and open up our world and the cognitive biases that we leverage in order to perceive a more finite world. That's not what I'm seeing happening in these models so far. So far, I'm seeing just the generation, not the and following the biases that we've already got, rather than trying to open up our cognitive biases into a broader reality.
So right now, I'm capable of designing any number of websites. I could, but I'm not. Usually somebody has to pay me for it. There has to be some motivation. Not most of our technology and our business is governed by the business, by the corporates, by the companies. And yeah, governments have slacked a lot. I don't see governments investing so much in the areas. I see a lot of people publishing their books and their papers and talking, and we've all seen this, but very few are actually out there solving the issues. So I think, until we have innovation that is funded by humanity, so to speak, for humanity, not for the economy, all of these things are possibilities. But we still have to realize it ourselves.
Yeah. And I think part of what's going on there, and this is half-baked, take it with a sea of salt. We, at least in the US, we used to have a lot of government funding for new research. And it was almost like, if it's going to be a public good, then the government will fund it. If it's pure profit, then corporations can go after that. And basically, as that public good became more juicy for the corporations, and the corporations wanted the GPS access and wanted the access to this and that, the breadth of what the government was willing to fund and how those taxes were being captured and being able to use, the tax base keeps going down. So the corporations are they don't want that innovation where they can't control it, basically.
Yeah.
Yes, so we agree on that.
Well, ultimately,
the only way to control people
don't exist.
is keep on the bias. Is the only. Otherwise, if you free them, then how are you going to control them? Yeah.
Yeah. How are you going to eke that growth and profit when there's no more growth to be had, and we're beyond the boundaries for all but 3 of our environmental boundaries?
Yeah,
you have to go back and get it from the people again.
Exactly, but this is that spiral dynamics of, like I've witnessed things where I was like, okay, well, this is like no different than being in a monarch a couple of 100 years ago. These people are taking everything for themselves and excluding everybody else and telling everybody else that they're better, and just because they say so, now you've got to somehow kiss their feet. And I mean, I've nearly gone down that road, and it's with so much communications. It's, I think one battle that we have is remaining with our feet on the ground and in reality with everybody, because our education misleads us, our jobs mislead us, our governments mislead us. And that comes back to another question, which I thought, would sway it a little bit too far, but that's relating to when I was studying public relations. And, horrible user experiences are sometimes great for public relations. And so the question becomes, how do we leverage the positive output of healthy humans in a dynamic where, while we look at some imaginary numbers and not the flesh and blood that surrounds us.
Yeah. And I think that actually starts talking about that, the negative form of rise states that I was trying to avoid.
You were trying. You're not going to get it. So
I mean, there's a
please
reason I didn't
extend.
delete it entirely.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, like, actually, and you started talking about our safety states. You know, if safety is awry, it doesn't really feel like safety when people are keeping learnings from other people just to for opportunistic leverage. So think about like the Teflon pans that were actually toxic, and that knowledge was kept from their consumer base so they could keep selling more. It's things like when safety is used for control, like in military states. You know, the narrative is we're enforcing your safety, but the reality is that the people living under that quote unquote safety don't feel safe.
Yeah.
So, and when safety is a part of privilege. So when, if somebody says, I don't feel safe here, and the go-to is, well, you're making me feel unsafe by not accepting my privilege that you need to feel this way so that you know, it becomes this weird round robin, when in fact, you know, it's not politics. It's that they really do feel unsafe. And now you're feeling unsafe because they feel unsafe, and they're recognized that they feel unsafe. And how do you manage that? This is getting into that headbutting again. So, but the reality is, if somebody is feeling unsafe, it's unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's more than just headbutts sometimes. I don't think all disagreements are headbutts.
Some are much more than.
I think you need a certain level of disagreement when you're having honest conversations. Because if you're just agreeing, then I think, well, you know, what's happening here. But
how can you continue to expand your understanding and knowledge if everybody agrees about everything? It would mean that, so we know the whole totality of reality at this point? We don't.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah. I have a little meme that I like to use, and it's a juxtaposition of a round world and a square world. And the one I say, you know, in Copernicus's day, we burned those who said the world was round. And in today's world, we roast those who think it's flat. I'm here, whether it's round, it's flat. The reality is that I'm here. The reality is not that it's round or flat. I have no way to determine that. People can tell me that, but I have no way to determine, unless I can now start elevating and, you know, start looking down. There's no factual data for what shape the world is other than this,
exactly.
that.
Other than a story that they told you. That's it. It's a story that they told you, and you take it for the truth or not. So, you know.
Well, and if you're really, really wanting to prove to yourself that the world is round or flat, you can get into things like orbital dynamics and the arc of the landscape, and actually work to get up to the space station on your own, so that you can see it firsthand, to see that these things are happening. But you know, first you have to be open to those experiences. You know, you have to be, yeah. So how do you convince somebody who doesn't want to do the math, who doesn't want to go through the program to get to the space station, who doesn't want to do anything but think about the world the way that they want to believe it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but this is where the personalities comes into it. But just a small little sidetrack. So I have been fooled into thinking something. And this is, we have certain experiences in the world which are not always honest and not always reflected. And, I don't want to go into conspiracy theories, but basically we're adults all conspiring against kids. We never, oh, Santa Claus, And when my daughter reached a certain age, she was quite offended. And she's like, do you want to keep me stupid forever? And I was like, no, we don't even think about that. So there's many ways that, we take things for granted because we have our experiences and we put this importance on our experiences that we don't always look at it from the other person's perspective. It's like a kid is just too young, it's cute, we have these validations. But for the kid, it's like, and then, when we go back from that into this topic, one area that so there's obviously the business motivation in what's the communication strategy for creating experiences in a certain way. But then there's also us as a society and the way that we evolve and the way that, people are influencing and shaping each other. And as a mother, I can tell you, I've had heartbreak like you can't believe. There's a lot of things that are happening to our children that shouldn't be happening. And it's, now if you juxtapose the judgments coming out of that perception next to somebody who's young and partying and they need to start working one day, you'll see some very different realities. And what I notice with my generation, so I started working early. I had a few challenges, and my main peers were people who were older than me. So I'm really awkward with my own generation at times. And this is due to these variations in our upbringing and the experiences that we've had. Yes. And I don't want to discredit anybody's experience, but where the clashing does happen, where it's not just a matter of opinion, is where somebody's in a more, they will believe that their reality, they can think for you, they know what you're thinking, they know what you're feeling. And when you're speaking, there's no credibility. And see with the media currently, sorry for going on and on, is that certain narratives are pushing us apart and forcing these ideas of that's good and that's bad, and let's attack little girls or let's burn the boomers. And these people are having real experiences. So you've found a lot of millennials, for example, who think, boomers are evil. And it's like, but I lived with boomers for a long time. So it's like the sensitivity of what we're exposed to that really creates those issues. And that's really how do you bridge those cultural, contextual, existential divides?
No, and part of what I almost kept in here and ultimately decided to leave out was one of the reasons I worked on this model for so long was that I was going from multiple cultures, and I could need to navigate half a dozen cultures in a day, because I come from the Midwest and I lived over here and I lived over here and I worked in here and I went to this college and so on and so forth. And every single one of those cultures had their own patterns of, you know, good and evil, right and wrong, the things you said and the things you didn't. And I'd be in this culture and say the right thing here and pivot over to this culture and say the wrong thing here that was the exact same thing and it's over here. So, and if you try to keep just the memory of it and try to, it puts facets on your personality, and I didn't want to do that. So that's one of the reasons why I created this nimble approach that was agnostic to culture and focused on how people were perceiving information. It doesn't fix anything. It just helps me feel more stable within all these different places that I have to work in.
So it's like a descriptive model that you're trying to say? Yeah.
Right. It's not about navigating this culture and then navigating that culture and then navigating that culture. It's about rolling it up into a higher level of patterns so that I could see, okay, that's what's sparking that. That's what's sparking that. I still made all the mistakes. I still pissed people off. But at least I could understand why, oh, that's what was going into that. That's what was going into that. I know that it was totally okay for me to push back like that over here. It's not over here. It's not that it was the difference in culture codes more than anything else.
Yeah. So from a design perspective, when I'm looking into experience, so this is a really great model for starting to understand the existential experience or the human experience. But you know, when you're going from information to design, from research to design, then of course there you need to find solutions for those issues. Yeah, and what do you? Yeah, do you have any reference to that? Any further models or articles that you've written? Like with those complexities, how can those watching and those here leverage that in a design environment?
So there is actually, I've got my everlasting gobstopper. It's not a double diamond process. It's an everlasting gobstopper. So depending on what project I'm using, I'm pulling a little bit from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from there and forgetting everything else because I'm trying to get things done under budget, under time, with the culture at hand, so on and so forth. So when I'm in that everlasting gobstopper, I'm really trying to think about scope. I'm really trying to think about the culture that I'm in. So this environment aspect of my model really does enter because I'm trying to understand what's going to be most useful for this project, for this team right now. Now, I see 10 steps ahead. So I can't help myself but to say, okay, so just watch for this. And when this pattern happens, you need to do this. But I'm still focused on, okay, the next step, the next thing you need to do is this. And what those objects are, because I'm looking at it from an information architecture model, because I'm looking at it based on the everlasting gobstopper, thinking about the information structures that I very briefly flashed on people at the beginning, thinking about this whole model, not just the context, the environment that I showed you guys today, but the whole model of environment, response, reaction. Actually, those are opposite: environment, reaction, response, and mind, to try to align it to what I'm working on right now. So every time I start a new project, it's not going to be the exact replica of another project. It's going to be aligned to that project according to this constellation of things that I'm making a bet that this, and this are going to be the key things that I need to worry about. And I'm not going to be able to stop myself from mentioning them.
and taking that into a multidimensional vision. I think that's like, at string theory says that at the core, everything has got a little string that vibrates, and according to how that vibrates, that generates reality. So I think, this is such a great analogy in logic here to show this overlapping concept, because I think I have a great book, The Grand Design of Everything. I think you were talking about as Stephen a bit earlier. So this is a great book.
Oh.
But when I look into physics and science, I see so much of design in there. I see our logic.
Yeah.
It's the human logic. So I really, I find it really interesting. You do write and publish on Medium. Can you give us some of your channels? Just share for those listening and watching and here.
Sure. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I pulled this slide up. So these are the key takeaways for this aspect of my model. That environment is the first of 4 nested nodes. So there's this, and honestly, it's the easiest of the nodes. So thank you for being my experiment to see whether or not I could actually make this work. It's not about outside appearance. It's about what is going on in people's mind and how they are perceiving their own environment. So we can't make assumptions based on how we're seeing people. We have to ask them questions. Basic UX research, still saying it out loud anyway. The labels are for their goals. Environment cannot be compartmentalized. It is compartmentalized in terms of the model, only for chunking. The lines are ghosts. They don't actually exist. But environment is a system. Systems flow, they expand and contract, and they are elastic. And that can actually also be found on Medium. I have the link here to the Design Bootcamp Systems Thinking Overview that actually links further into the 3 sections that I just mentioned: flow, expand and contract, elastic.
Mm-hmm. And we'll also share that link in the comments for you guys to just simply click on. And of course, Angela has got a page on designinfocus.org on the Randstad UX portal. That link will also be shared. And there you can sort of find all of her social links. Of course, I've left her link in her LinkedIn link in the comments here and also online. So do reach out to Angela, especially if you would like to hear more, because Angela is considering, speaking more frequently. I hope your first session went well. Did you have a good time?
Yes, I did. Thank you for making it easy. I appreciate all that you've done. You have alleviated a lot of my, I think it could actually be considered anxiety. It wasn't just, well, is this going to work? It was, oh my God.
Yeah, well, I think it was a very insightful session. I think if anybody wants to pose any more questions or share any more thoughts and ideas, now is a good time. But yeah, I would highly suggest that you follow Angela online. And Prakar has got a question here in the comments. If one draws a conclusion from this explanation, a polarity arises to regress to the mean for optimal ideals. A sense action model can be helpful. Mathematical automation and decision-making needs an end point, for the lack of a better word. Exploration, description, practice has its own challenges.
Yeah, and I would agree or disagree on that based on how nimble that mathematical expression was written. So if it's written to be as nimble as a human mind, as multifaceted, and I see the yes. then it's totally possible. So, but that is not normally where we start. We start with concrete and test that concrete to make sure that it's working. And often when we get to these models, the concrete kind of keeps on because that's what people are understanding. And it's hard to follow the abstract. It's hard to follow information into fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth dimensional. I feel like Buckaroo Banzai sometimes when I say this, but it's not easy to follow. We have to give people time to get there. So it still becomes a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment? Because also what you're describing is another concept that I consider like mental health, that is the cognitive flexibility of a person. If you have this flexibility to have a multi-perspective or change or switch, because you are adapting, you are regulating, self-regulating with the environment, if you do that, you can flow. And then you feel good. But if you are rigid and you just can see your one point of view in a situation, then it's when you suffer.
Yes, absolutely.
So your model is reflecting that, the need of this dynamic flow to live well, basically.
Yeah.
I could understand what you said.
But
yeah, so go ahead.
No, Angela, after you.
So and that goes back to that idea of a fractal through our culture and our groups. If we understand that on an individual level, think about why we're not understanding that in our cultures. Why are we not flexing in our cultures? Why can we not flex in our society? We have things in place that are trying to keep us in the same, that are trying to say this will work this way ad infinitum. So we need to unblock those things in order to have that flexibility, not only with individuals, but in our group dynamics, in our cultural dynamics, in our societal dynamics, in our species level dynamics.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So my adage to that is more like why that exists. So safety. I think, people who are sometimes too open-minded, I'm going to talk from experiences where I consider it too much, perspectives of people who, wanted to justify violation, acts of violation. And then you try and be reasonable and, but in that you get exposed to certain visuals, ideas that can be very harmful because it's violent in its nature. So I think, as a survival method, we need to sometimes close our minds and say, okay, well, I'm going to filter this out as irrelevant and this is relevant. So therein comes another challenge. And if you're applying this to a business, obviously their motivation is always growth or profits. How do you sort of balance? Have you written any further articles on getting into those little areas? Do you have any suggestions where we might come to find information on keeping a healthy balance of, being dynamic, but not changing so much that you lose your own core?
So one thing that came to mind is the dark triad are real. They do exist. It is not a figment of anybody's imagination. They will gaslight you. They will do all these things to bend your reality to their use. And when the full model, if if I manage to get the full model out, it is helping me see them more easily. It still takes hundreds of hours to really understand that,
Yeah.
okay, this is happening. One of the, looking at the broader world, going back to my specific references, Kat Holmes and her mismatch theory, it's an amazing way to start thinking about context and aligning it to business and ways that we can help them think about that. And Edward O. Wilson, it is not a design book, but consilience, that idea that you don't have to stay within your silo, that you can do the critical thinking. You have to think critically, you have to triangulate, you have to talk to people and take it with a grain of salt, and at the same time really listen. It's not always an easy balance to do, but if you can think about consilience and think about what other information you can pull from areas that don't necessarily aren't necessarily predicated in design itself. So thinking about biodiversity, and that idea can be applied to design. Thinking about, oh God, what else did I think about in here? I know I have at least a half a dozen of them in there. But you do the work and you kind of say, I'm not paying attention to the silos, but you do the work while you say, I'm not paying attention to the silos. The silos were never intended, or I want to believe that the silos were never intended to control and devise our reality. Those educations, they were intended to be the introduction to information in a constructed way that people could navigate more easily. And then people started seeing it from the top down and ignored the idea that it could go from the bottom up, ignored the idea of that the hierarchy was not the model. It was just a simplification of the network, which was a simplification of the system. And you have to use that as a springboard into the more complex information. And once you get to that more complex information, it's finding your own navigation. So you have to understand, or I use my information architecture all the time to understand that it is about orientation, so knowing where you're standing, findability, understanding where the information sets are coming from and where it might be useful to check, and navigation, getting from point A to point B, getting from your point of orientation to where you want to get. Those information pathways are not set in stone. Just because something is in a hierarchy doesn't mean that data is only available in a hierarchy. You can take the network routes to connect those. And Edward Wilson, consilience, amazing job at explaining how to do that.
And we'll add the links to that in the chat as well for those watching. So one visual that sort of struck me, and this is my personal vision, the hierarchies are mental constructs. There is no hierarchy amongst humans. We're all walking on the same earth. Like, none of us are flying. There's nobody above anybody else. So we exist on a flat line, but we mentally construct these realities of hierarchies. But if you look at the shape, one way that I think, so you did a great job of also showing the overview, but there's also you, or not just you, but the user, the single points. And if you look at those hierarchies, it could become more like the arrows on a compass. So use this information as a compass to guide you. It's not like it's not like a template which you can cut and copy paste.
Right.
No, and
so
it could be superposition because, for example, in an organization, you can have a formal leader authority here, but you have informal leaders, and people sometimes follow the other person more than the other. So you can have two networks there, I guess. I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, there are so many ways in which reality actually disproves the idea of hierarchy. It is truly only a simplified form for navigation and findability.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and actually, oh my God, I'm going to plug. I do have another talk in the works for, I think it's for February 1st. And that actually is talking about hierarchies a little bit.
Ah, okay.
And can you tell me more, or tell us more about that talk?
So it's actually, somebody was very curious about how I went up learning curve so quickly. So basically entering new domains of information and being able to design within those relatively quickly. And ultimately it comes down to understanding the structures, the information structures that you're working with. So in that first slide, you know, I have those two things, the information structures and the Who-ness model, focusing on the information structures, understanding that most information is in a hierarchy, and leveraging that understanding to kind of spelunk in the dark spaces where the hierarchy hasn't formalized. All while acknowledging that I'm not actually developing knowledge, I'm just developing enough information navigation to be able to understand how to present it to other people. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. So hopefully you'll share the link with us, and then I'll post it here as well. But I'll also put it on your page on the platform. So
thank you.
Yeah. This video will be edited and posted on your page, along with all of the other links. So any resources you want to share, Angela will get all of that sorted, and that will be posted by the end of tonight or tomorrow. And I think, yeah, we've had a good solid 2 hours.
We really have.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting. Yeah, I'm 18.
I can go longer, but yeah, I need to make some dinner, and it's been a early morning for me. So Angela, thank you so much for joining, and Marcella,
Thank you, Angela. Yes.
Marcella,
thank you
thank you for joining as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm not a very gracious host. Sorry.
Are you kidding? You're the most gracious. This is one of the reasons why I was like, okay, yes, I'll listen to you and do this. Thank you.
I hate interrupting people, but it's also like, you know, when making content for the public, that sometimes you get into the narrative of like talking to everybody, but then you also get into the personal conversations, and yeah,
of course. It would be normal in my culture anyway. We interrupt each other all the time. So
yeah,
it's a cultural dynamic. Yay.
Yeah, I think it's also like, you know, when you're like I'm moderating different chats and windows, and then also looking at people, but also trying to be cognitive of everything you have to say, and then slight delays in the internet, like that gets me really annoyed. Anyway, from my side, I want to thank you both, and yeah, I'm sure I'm going to see you again. Yeah, and Marcella, welcome to the network. I hope you enjoyed your first day.
You. Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Very insightful.
Very cool.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And
I'm glad that you started with Angela with such interesting topic. So
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yes, yes, you did very well.
I worry so much that it's so complex and I haven't simplified it enough. But
it's not, because I think that you should also educate people that is how mind works. It's not that simple, not yes or no, binary context. No,
right.
I mean, people need to start to learn to see the reality in a more complex way.
Yes.
Mhm.
So,
That's ultimately where my brain went.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and thank you both, honestly. Thank you all. Thank you so much for listening and paying attention to me for 2 whole hours. My goodness.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna be a broken record. I am already a broken record, but yeah, for me it was a great talk, very insightful, very interesting, and maybe you'll join us again and take a deeper dive. Yeah.
The
And
next
then,
layer is the next thing on my list.
ooh, okay. So we're gonna have Angela back soon, and Marcella is gonna help us create some Spanish events or events in Spanish. So yeah, those who have joined us online and here as well, thank you all for joining. And yeah, leave your comments, connect with Marcella, connect with Angela, and see you next month, the second Tuesday, as this event will be every Tuesday of the month, every second Tuesday of the month. So see you then, or at one of the other events.
Perfect. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.